Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get Right with DigiByte. My name is Mike. It's another fantastic day on the DigiByte blockchain. I'm so excited for today's guest to help us dive into and go underneath the hood of the DigiByte blockchain to talk about core wallets, nodes, testnets, mainnets. Joining us is Olly and Rutger, who are DigiByte community members who are very involved behind the scenes with the critical and integral infrastructure of the DigiByte blockchain. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Get Right with DigiByte. How are you both doing today?
I'm great. I'm very happy to be here. It's nice to join you both.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise, doing great today, and happily to help some of the new community members setting up their nodes.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you both here. I know both of you are very knowledgeable about these subjects, at least more so than myself. And many of our viewers, I'm sure, maybe whether they're newcomers or they've been around a while, these are very important topics just to understand, how the blockchain works and what makes it, strong and resilient. And so let's just jump right in. What do you say, guys? All right. So
Absolutely.
the first question is just, if you could explain, what is a full DigiByte node and why is it important?
Yeah. So I'm quite happy to take that question. Yeah, a full node, you can look at a full node in the DigiByte network as a program that is validating the transactions and the blocks that are being mined on the DigiByte blockchain and adding them to the chain. So each block that's being mined and all the transactions that have been put into the DigiByte blockchain, they will be validated by the nodes. And then when they comply with the rules that are written in the software, then they will be added to the blockchain, and then also they will be relayed to other nodes to be able to reach consensus on the blockchain. So that's the main reason why we need open nodes. Second one is that it also supports the wallets that directly connect to the DigiByte blockchain. So we have the mobile wallet, that one connects directly to the open nodes that are running in the blockchain.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So when it comes to node, how many different nodes are there? And it's you mentioned that the open node. So this is the type of node that can communicate with other computers that are running the blockchain instead of a closed node, which is, it doesn't verify the data that's on the blockchain. Am I understanding that correctly? Is that?
Well, it still verifies it and also
Okay.
adds it to the blockchain, but it is not able to relay this information to other nodes. So you
Okay.
need a certain amount of open nodes to be able for other nodes to connect and reach the consensus, and also for the mobile wallets to be able to connect.
Yeah, I think the way I would explain a node is that it's running. Miners are basically there to take a bunch of transactions that are being made on the network, and they bundle them up and add them to what's called a block, and those blocks get added to the front of the chain. And it's the process of mining, which is a kind of game of chance where every miner is competing to be the person to add the next block. That they are basically adding the next bunch of transactions on and confirming them to the front of the blockchain. So mining requires a lot of energy and power and uses, expensive equipment, but a full node is essentially simply taking the work that's been done by a miner and basically simply verifying that it is accurate. So miners do not require massively expensive hardware to run. Miners. Full nodes do not require expensive hardware. You simply need to run the blockchain, the DigiByte blockchain software on a machine somewhere, and it will simply take every transaction that's ever happened on the network and go through it in sequence and verify each one is accurate. Yeah. So anybody can run a full node. As long as you have a reasonably powerful computer around, you can do it. And you should. If you're a keen member of the DigiByte community, you should be running a node. If you can.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's something we're hoping to spread the word and inform and educate people to go out and have their own node running, because it can, as you said, it provides consensus to the network and to the blockchain, and this is what makes a proof of work chain like DigiByte function, right? So you were talking before about some of the hardware involved with mining, that it's can be very expensive, but the hardware for running a node, it can be very simple. Is there certain types of hardware that are best suited to run nodes, or what are the minimum requirements to get that going?
So to run a DigiByte node, you probably need a machine with about 8 gigabytes of RAM. I think it uses between about 6 gigabytes of RAM and say 12 gigabytes of RAM, and you probably need about 45 gigabytes of hard disk space. So of course you can download the DigiByte software and run it on your personal computer. That's possible for anyone. But if your computer doesn't have that much RAM to begin with, and you're running a DigiByte node, you're not going to have that much space left over for other kind of uses. So generally, it's a good idea to have another machine. So if you've got an old computer lying around, or you can use a single board computer like a Raspberry Pi, that's another good option. You can run a node on one of those. So if you need a device with about 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you need about 40 gigabytes of disk space. I don't think actually in terms of processing power it needs to be that powerful. In fact, even a 10-year-old desktop PC or laptop should be able to do it. But that's pretty much what you need.
I even run it on a separate machine with only 4 gigabytes of RAM, but that's the absolute minimum. But you can still do it. Yeah. So a single mini computer, you can buy it secondhand for maybe $100 or something like that, and strip it down and only run the DigiByte software. You can do it on a 4 gigabyte, but indeed 8 is a little bit better, because then you can still have some moving around for other stuff to run on the same machine. Yeah. Okay.
And are there any issues if you're running, using a VPN, for example? Are there any roadblocks and that if you're have some like third-party software, firewalls?
I think what Olly rightfully said, the only thing you have to do is to just download the DigiByte software and run it on your machine. But there is one tricky bit, and that is if you run it just like that, and your machine is not reachable from the outside world, then you cannot really participate in the consensus mechanism. Because if your machine is closed from the outside world, you can still run it and you can still validate the blocks, and you actually use then the software as your wallet only. But if you also want to participate and strengthen the network, then you will have to open a port. That's the port 12024. In your computer, and that can indeed be that your firewall, if you're running a firewall on your machine, that you need to open that port 12024 to be able to be reachable from the outside world. But if you're behind a router, you also might have to forward this port towards your machine. And there are several instructions for that, to dive into that a little bit deeper on our DGB Wiki page. So we have the DGB wiki.com, where there are some great manuals. They can point you forward on how to set it up. And that also goes for the VPN. So VPN will not alter your functionality at all, but the VPN provider must also support that the port 12024 is open towards your machine that you run the software on.
Okay.
Rutger makes a very good point. Yeah, I mean it isn't enough to just run a full node. If you really want to help, you do need to open this port. And typically, if you're a home user and you're running it on your home network, it involves you have to log into the sort of web interface of your router, and essentially open up a port, the port 12024, and then point it at the device, so that sort of connections from the internet on this port are then forwarded through your router onto the DigiByte node on your local network. Now, as Rutger says, the wiki page will have instructions on how to do that. And actually, if you join any of the DigiByte groups and you don't know how to do that, anybody will help you and explain how to do it. So you can even reach out to Rutger or I'm sure, if you need help doing this.
Absolutely.
We can tell you what to do. Yeah.
All right, that's great. Yeah, we'll make sure to put
Rutger.
We'll make sure to put the links down below in the description to the DGB Wiki page and all the information about the write-up for port forwarding 12024. So one of the things I wanted to ask you guys about is this concept of bootstrapping, because of course, with DigiByte being such a long blockchain, it has over 16 million blocks. It can take a very long time for your wallet to sync up. But I've heard of the bootstrapping where you can just take a file and you can save some time with that. Are there any risks involved with doing it that way?
Well, I think that's a nice bridge towards Olly's t-shirt, because what is it saying, Olly?
Don't trust, verify.
Exactly. So, so the whole point is that you run your own node because you want to be able to verify all the blocks and all the transactions of the DigiByte blockchain. So when you run your full node, it first starts with an empty database, and then it will sync, download all the blocks from the DigiByte blockchain and verifies it and puts it on the software. So whether if you would download a Bootstrap, that's effectively the whole DigiByte blockchain in one file. But of course, it can speed up the process because you only have to download the file, but then you don't know what the contents of that file is. So you want to be able to verify it yourself, or let your DigiByte node verify all the blocks in the blockchain. And so that's why we always say it's better to run your own node and also verify the whole DigiByte blockchain yourself.
Yeah, and the process of bootstrapping basically involves taking the blocks from somebody else's node and literally just copying out the data file and then putting it into your node. So that can be faster if you're in a hurry, but it's probably best, if you're not in a hurry, to always just sync naturally, as in allow your node to go out to the rest of the blockchain and then verify each block itself. Because otherwise you are trusting the other person's data. And you don't want to trust, you want to verify.
Exactly. And it will only take maybe 4 to 8 hours, depending on how fast your machine is in your internet connection. And you don't have to do anything for it. You just run the DigiByte wallet on your machine, and then it will automatically sync with the network. So there's no action for you to involve. Just wait some hours for the whole syncing process to finish.
Yeah, you just set it and forget it, and just let it run its course, and then that way hey, every block within my node is its own natural native block, not just someone else's. That, like say, you got to trust them that there's no funny business or any tampering going on with that data.
Exactly.
Let me ask you guys, tell me how does a node crawler work?
I'm hoping Rutger's going to take this
one.
Yeah,
of course.
I'm not sure I have a good answer for it.
Well, node crawler, you can look at it in 2 ways. One type of node crawler is, we had this app that was built for Android by Noah Seidman, the other a year or 3 back, I believe, that just goes by all the IP addresses that have been involved in transacting and processing the transactions on the DigiByte blockchain. So in that sense, all the DigiByte wallets that have been running. And the last time I checked, it was about 12,000 or something like that, 13,000 that were involved. But, and that's a very important distinction, they were not open nodes, because those nodes only run as a wallet, but they didn't have port 12024 open and available for the other nodes to connect to. And so that's why we really ask all the members of the DigiByte community to run their own node, but also to open the port 12024 to strengthen the network, because that's very important. So, and we see indeed that we are running about 200, 250 open nodes at the moment. So there are 2 websites. Maybe you can also share those links, Mike, towards the node crawlers. For the open nodes, that is a visual representation of the approximate location of where the open nodes are running. Of course, it's not precise, so that's always great to know. But that's really the number that we want to get strengthened in the DigiByte community. So everybody run the node, but also open the port 12024, and that's not a danger because you only open the node, the port that is connected to your node. So there is no security risk involved with your computer or your data or whatever, because it's only that port that is open, and that only allows the connections towards your node to strengthen the network.
Okay. All right. So that's the key. We want everyone to create an open node. That way it's a full node, and it can can talk to all the other nodes the way that that actually contributes, to the blockchain and adds to its resiliency and makes it stronger all around.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning that, in a perfect world, you want to run your node on a machine that is on 24/7. But if you can't do that, even running it on a machine which gets turned off sometimes is also better than not running it at all. So every little helps in securing the network, and the more nodes we have, the better. But it's really worth going the extra step to make sure that port is open if you're running it on a machine that is going to be on, 95% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you already said, so next to the instructions that we have on the DGB Wiki page, make sure that you reach out to community members on the Telegram channels for DigiByte or in Discord, which the DigiByte Alliance has been doing a lot of work into to make that a more vibrant community, but also on Twitter, of course, you can reach out to community members to help to open up that port. Sometimes it's already open, depending on your internet setup, and sometimes you need to tweak some settings in your router. So it is no one size fits all solution for that, unfortunately. So you have to do some investigation to get that port open, but it is doable because I have helped many community members actually doing it. And you don't need to have a really deep computer science knowledge to do it. But well, you have to be able to log into your router if that's the case, and make that forward happening. But it's doable. So
okay,
let's do it.
That's great. Well, I was curious because I know you mentioned how when you run a full node, there's no risk to your wallet. If you have DigiByte in the wallet that you're running as an open node, it's people can't get to that. But I'm just curious if going back to this idea of a node crawler, could someone just take that information and kind of triangulate your physical location based on that data and come knocking on your door saying, "Hey, you got any DigiByte for me?" Is that a risk?
No. Well, in the sense that if you don't use a VPN, then your location will be somewhat in the area. So it's never a precise location. So it's more like what town or city is it running in. So that's
I think also just because you're running a node doesn't necessarily mean that node also has a wallet on it.
Exactly.
In fact, you don't actually need to have any funds in your full node wallet. You don't even need to use the wallet on your full node. You just want to run the software because the node is there to help support the network. It's not actually really nothing to do with the funds on the network particularly, or at least your funds. There's no guarantee that if someone was to triangulate you and locate your node, that your node would even have any DigiByte on it. I think that's thing. But also that it's worth mentioning that the area of the software where the wallet is and the area of the software where the node is are completely separate. So when if you open that port on your router, you're not exposing your wallet file in any way to the outside world.
Correct.
All right. Yeah, that's very important. So good to know. Well, moving on, if you could tell us a little bit, about header sync. What does that mean, and what's happening during that process?
Well, if I think it's the easiest way to explain that is that all the blocks of the DigiByte blockchain are in a database running on your machine, and a database also uses headers. So that's the first thing that you sync on, just to fill up the database. So it's something that you don't have to know anything specific about. It's just an automated process during the sync of the blockchain.
Okay, so that's just a common thing with any database?
It seems to be the first step of when your node begins syncing. The first thing it does is get the headers from another node. Now, I would be the first to admit that I do not fully understand the technical stuff that's going on, but it's an automated process. So first it syncs the headers, and then it begins working its way through the history or the blockchain history, starting at the Genesis block all the way up to the present. And it can take the first time you sync, it can take 24 hours or so. It could take that long, probably less, but yeah.
Okay. And what can you tell me about seeders?
Okay, so a DigiByte seeder is essentially some software that runs on a server somewhere at a web address. So it actually has a URL that you can point at. And it's basically running a server, a DNS server, which is essentially capturing and relaying the IP addresses of nodes on the network. So if you set up a new full node on the DigiByte network, that node needs to know about other nodes. And until it knows one node, every node has the ability to tell another node about the nodes that it knows about. So, but the first time you run the software, it doesn't know any nodes, so it can't connect. So what the seeder does, and these addresses are actually written into the DigiByte core software, there's probably about 8 or 9 of them. Your software will connect to the node, to the seeder, which will then have your node say, this is my IP address of my node, and in return it will receive a list of IP addresses of other nodes, and it can then use those nodes to to start syncing and doing its thing. So it's the sort of first step in the process of connecting a node to the network. You need a seeder. Now you can, of course, actually go into your node's console and add an IP address of a known other node or a list of IP addresses. So you can kind of speed up the process by manually adding a list of IP addresses of known nodes. But the seeder will kind of do that for you automatically. And this is why if you can have a problem that if all the seeders go down, it's difficult for new nodes to connect to the network without the person setting up the node manually adding the IP address of another known node. So they're very important. You don't need a lot of them, and it's helpful to have a few. But it's helpful to have a few dedicated members of the community running a seeder. But it's a big commitment because it requires a long-term commitment to say I will keep this thing up because it's written into the DigiByte core software. So to change the seeders, you need a new release of the software. I hope that covers it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you for explaining that. One topic I was curious about, if you could spend some time, the difference between a testnet and a mainnet, and what is the role of a node between both of those?
Well, it's exactly the same software. So you can if you download the DigiByte wallet from digibyte.org and install it on your Windows, Linux, or Mac system, then you can configure if you want to run it as a mainnet node, that's contributing to the DigiByte blockchain, or you run it as a test net node. And so if it's a completely different separated network from each other, but it works on exactly the same way.
Yeah, the testnet node is functionally identical to the mainnet node.
Yeah.
The only difference being is that everybody has agreed that the testnet DigiByte are worth nothing. So it's really useful that if a developer wants to build on top of DigiByte, they can connect and interact on the testnet and basically use DigiByte that don't cost them anything. And, and if they lose them, it doesn't matter. And if things go wrong and break, it doesn't matter, because they're all doing it on the testnet. And once they're happy that their software, whatever they're building, actually works as it should, they can then switch over to use the mainnet. It's basically a sort of sandbox where developers can play and know that they're not putting real DigiByte at risk.
Okay. Oh, that's great. So, yeah, like I said, it's just a place for developers to kind of test out their apps, their products that they're looking to launch on DigiByte without having to actually pay for any of those transactions. We talk a lot about, how the transaction fees of DigiByte are just so small and next to nothing. But, if you're testing something out, I mean, it could add up over time. And why incur extra costs if you don't need to? You can just jump on the test net and do all your testing there.
Exactly. And I think also, I think there is an argument to say that because DigiByte's individual coins are worth very little and fees are very low, that maybe you can do all this on mainnet anyway because it's not going to cost you that much. But I think it's important that a blockchain has a functional testnet. And while DigiByte costs very little now, we don't know what the future holds. And it could be that, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, having a really functional testnet could be really useful. It could be critical because, DigiByte could be worth more then when it's not so easy to just throw them away, or they're worth more to everybody, let's say. We can but hope.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I think like I said, having the proper test net for developers to just jump on and not have to concern themselves with using any real DigiByte or running into any issues. I think that's a key benefit to the community and for the developers. I know a few minutes ago we were talking about opening up, forwarding port 12024. I've also read about port 12026. What's the difference between the two, and when would you need to open up the 12026?
So port 12026 is it's the equivalent port to 12024, but for the testnet. So if you're running a testnet node, you need to open 12026. If you're running a mainnet node, you open 12024. And I think it's probably worth saying at this point that the network obviously doesn't need a huge number of testnet nodes. But if you're already running a mainnet node and you want to help make, it easy for developers to build on DigiByte, also run a testnet node. You should be able to run both on your network. Obviously, you need to make sure that the two don't kind of conflict with each other in any way. So that's why there are these two different ports used by mainnet and testnet, so that they're sort of operating on different channels, as it were. If you can run a testnet node as well, you're helping developers. And we had an issue recently where it was discovered that there weren't that many testnet nodes, and that's actually something we've been working on with the community in the last week or two to actually get more people running testnet nodes. Because while you don't need hundreds, you do need a bare minimum so that developers can actually use the network and actually get stuff done. And similarly, the testnet network also needs its own seeders and its own miners. So there is a sort of minimum commitment required by the community to keep the testnet network functional and usable to help developers build on DigiByte.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware that you would have to do mining on a testnet. network.
Yeah,
but I guess that
it's a
makes
kind
sense.
of it's the difficulty is obviously kept very low. So people don't want to spend a lot of money mining coins that aren't worth anything. But then again, you do need a miner to add the new blocks and new transactions to the front of the chain. So you don't need a lot of miners, but then again, you also actually don't want a lot because that will drive up the difficulty. So, there are people mining on the testnet, and it's great that there are people doing that because, it's important. It's it keeps that testnet network working so that developers can use it.
Okay. Rutger, I'm wondering, are there any, online resources that people can find out for themselves? They want to follow up and get some additional information about running a node.
Absolutely. So if you go to the digibyte.org website, you can see in the menu the download segment. And if you go down there, you will be automatically being pulled towards the section of download your DigiByte core. So you can choose for Windows, for Apple, Linux distributions, and just download your DigiByte core software, which is the full node, and install it on your machine. Next to that, you can go to the DigiByte wiki page. That's dgbwiki.com. And there you will find a section with DigiByte guides. And there is a guide on running a DigiByte full node. There is a guide on running it on a Linux server or a Pine, a Raspberry Pi. And also there is instructions on port forwarding your port 12024 towards your DigiByte node. So I think those are the most important resources for everybody to go to. And to make sure you all run your own full DigiByte node and open port 12024 to support the network.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for that. And we'll make sure to put all the links down below in the description box so people can find those easily.
I think it's worth adding that, and if you get stuck and you have a problem or there's something you don't understand or you have questions, go to the DigiByte one of the DigiByte Telegram groups. Say, I need help setting up a node. Please, somebody help me, and somebody will. Or they'll point you to someone who can. So, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'd be very happy to help anyone get their node online. The more nodes, the better.
All right. Well, yeah, that's a great point about the Telegram chats. The DigiByte community is very helpful with a lot of people, and so we'll put the links down below so people can reach out to them. And also, thank you for offering your services to help community members out as well who might have any questions. I do have a couple follow-up questions with you, Olly, but I understand, Rutger, we have to let you go. You've got another appointment, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us. I know it's been great seeing you again, and you're always just a wealth of knowledge. And I know, myself and the rest of the community really appreciates all the work and time you put in to providing all this vital information for the community. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Rutger.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and that's absolutely likewise. And Olly, it's great to have you on the show, and maybe we can do some more stuff in the future together.
Great,
so,
good to see you, Rutger.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
thanks,
all right, take care, Rutger.
Bye.
See you next time. Okay, bye. All right, Olly. So as I mentioned, you're working on a special project here known as the DigiNode. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the DigiNode is and what are your plans with it?
Okay, so a DigiNode is kind of a sort of umbrella term for a node where you're running both a DigiByte full node and a DigiAsset node. Now, I should probably explain a little bit about what a DigiAsset node. This has been developed by Matthew Cornelis, and the early generations of DigiAssets on the DigiByte blockchain had while the sort of assets themselves were decentralized, the sort of metadata that went with them, as in the images and text that go with a kind of an NFT or something, were generally stored on a centralized server. And this was less than ideal. So what Matthew did was to take what's called IPFS. It stands for Interplanetary File System. So it's a way of storing data in a decentralized way. So he created a complementary node to the DigiByte node that stores all of the metadata related to Digi assets. So the two work together. And so what I decided to do was that, one of the problems with running a node is that ideally you want to run it 24/7. You want this machine to be on all the time. So running it on your primary computer is not always practical. Ideally, a lot of people quite often have an old computer lying around, or maybe they have a Raspberry Pi or some device like that, one of these single board computers. And the nice thing about those is, particularly a Raspberry Pi, is that they're nice and compact, and you can put them on a shelf somewhere and forget about them. The problem with them is that, if you're running a second computer just to be a node, you probably don't want to have a keyboard and a mouse and all of those extra stuff connected to them, because it takes up space. What you want is a small, compact device to run as your DigiByte node that you can stick on a shelf somewhere and forget about it. So what I set out to do was to make it easy for people who don't have much Linux experience, or even any Linux experience, to install a DigiByte node and a Digi asset node, so a DigiNode, on a computer with no screen or no desktop operating system. So everything is done via what's called the terminal, where you type in commands. So DigiNode Tools is basically a set of scripts. So what you do is you set up the operating system on your machine that you're going to use. You then remotely connect to that machine from your main computer over what's called SSH. So it's basically a terminal where you can type commands in and you can connect to that machine to control it. And then you paste in one line of one command into the terminal, press enter, and then my script, the DigiNode Tool script, will take you through a menu-driven setup to set up a DigiByte node and a Digi asset node. It also includes some other features which I could maybe show you, or it also includes like a kind of status monitor, so a sort of text user interface to show you that the node is operating as it should be, on the basis that you don't have a monitor attached to it. So you can do this from your other computer. So it basically makes it easy for people to set up a node on an old computer that they might have lying around.
Okay. Well, that's very fascinating. I mean, it sounds like a great way to provide a tool that, is useful to people who want to set up both, the DigiByte node as well as the Digi asset node. Can I share your screen? Is that okay if we pull that up so people
can
give you a little
look? A little demo.
A little preview there. So I know you mentioned before, as far as Digi assets go, because I know, when it was first released, I was very excited about it. I thought it has great potential for a number of reasons, but it had those drawbacks. One of them being a lot of the metadata attached to that asset was on a centralized server, and now we can make it truly decentralized utilizing IPFS, and that metadata is spread out and not at those points of failure that if something ever happens to that server where that data resides. So tell us a little more about this DigiNode here.
Okay, so what I was going to give you a quick demo on is actually setting up how kind of easy this makes it to set up the entire DigiByte node and Digi asset node on your machine that you don't have access to. So on my desk here, I have a Raspberry Pi 8 gigabyte single board computer. It's in its own case, and it's got a SSD connected to it over USB. And all I've done on this machine is install the Raspberry Pi OS operating system on it. And you can do that. I'm not actually going to show that part in this video, but I will be putting out some instructions explaining how to do that. But essentially, you kind of copy the operating system onto the drive, and then you plug the drive into the Raspberry Pi, turn it on, and it will power up and then enable you to connect remotely to it over what's called SSH. So on my screen here, this is the DigiNode Tools GitHub page on the left. And on the right here, I have a terminal window on my Mac. And you can see the commands here. I can actually, I can type things into the command line here and do things. So in order to connect to my Raspberry Pi, which is also on the same network, I can actually, if I go to, you can put in this command, which is SSH, and then a username and then the address on my local network of the machine. So I'm now just going to connect to it and put in my password, which I set up earlier. Remember what it is. So now I am now actually connected remotely to the Raspberry Pi on my home network. So you can actually see the prompt here. I've called this machine DigiNode Testnet because I was practicing setting it up as a testnet node, but it could also just be called DigiNode on its own. And then if I go down to on the GitHub page here, this is the command you need. This is the what this will do is it will get the install script from GitHub's website and run it on your local machine. So I'm literally just going to copy this command here, and I'm going to paste it in over here on this machine and press return. And what this script does is it goes to GitHub and it does a load of system checks to make sure that your device is powerful enough to run a DigiNode. It checks that it has enough RAM and that it's got enough disk space, and that the operating system that you're using is capable of running a DigiByte node and a DigiAsset node. And then the nice part is that, if you don't know Linux, you're going to get menus to talk you through the process of doing it. So as long as you can do that first step, SSH into your machine and paste in that command, you should be able to do the rest. So then we get to a menu and it explains what the DigiNode setup is and what we're trying to do. And if I press OK, there's a donation box there. If anyone feels like sending me some DigiByte, please do. The next thing is it basically says, you need to make sure that your device has what's called a fixed IP address on your network. Now, this isn't always essential, and I'm not going to explain too much about this, but what you need to do is that in order to forward those ports that we talked about earlier, port 12024, you essentially need to tell your router, open this port 12024 on the router, and any command from the internet that comes to this port, send it on to the machine running my node. So it needs to point at the IP address of the machine. Now, it can also identify it in other ways, so it may not be strictly essential to always make sure your machine has the same IP address, but you can normally do that via your router settings. Anyway, you need to make sure it always has the same address on the network, because otherwise when it's forwarding that port, it could send it to the wrong place. So that's just getting you to confirm that. So you can see my IP address of my Raspberry Pi is 192.168.1.17. Okay. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah.
So the next thing it helps you to do is it will actually help you to set up a swap file on the machine that's running. If you're running both a DigiByte node and a DigiAsset node, the amount of memory that you need to do that can actually often go above 8 gigabytes. So even if you're running on a computer that has at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, you need what's called a swap file, which is basically like a secondary memory area that's on your hard disk, and the computer will move data between the memory and the swap area and back and forth to ensure it has enough total memory. You don't really need to know how this works, but this basically will now help us to set it up. So it's suggesting the amount of swap space we need, and I'm just going to agree to the default. And then we get to the main menu. So it's created a swap file just to make sure it has enough memory. And you can then choose from this menu whether you want to install a full DigiNode, which is both a DigiByte node and a DigiAsset node, or one or the other, or you can choose just to install this DigiNode tools itself. I mean, maybe you already have a node on a computer that you want to be able to use the status monitor that I'll show you in a minute. But anyway, so we're going to do full DigiNode. Press return. It's then telling you need to open these ports. So you need to open 12024 for your DigiByte node, and you need to open 4001 for your DigiAsset node. Now, some routers can use what's called UPnP, which basically means that they try to automatically forward those ports for you. But if your router is anything like mine, it doesn't always work very well. So this option here gives you the option to say, do you want to see if it can do it automatically, the port forwarding part, or you can agree, okay, I'll set those up on my own. So I'm going to say set up manually. So I will do that later. And then it begins the installation process, and it basically goes through, make sure that the system has all the packages it needs. It downloads it goes to DigiByte, the GitHub website, gets the latest version of DigiByte Core. It also then gets all of the packages needed to run DigiAssets. And it's really just a question of waiting. The nice thing is you can go away and make a cup of coffee. And, you know, historically, you probably would have had to type each of the commands to do this into the command line one at a time. So this script basically does all the hard work for you.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you can just click through a few buttons and make a few selections along the way, as opposed to, like you said, typing in each command one by one. I mean, that sounds like a very tedious and arduous process, especially for someone, you know, like myself. I'm not, you know, I spend like zero time in, you know, terminal mode on my computer unless I absolutely have to. So it's, you know, someplace I prefer to avoid.
The hope is to make it so that you don't need to know that much about the sort of packages and Linux and all of that in order to get this going. Now, it does ask one thing here, that IPFS is what's used for DigiAssets. And if I've kind of anticipated that maybe people might want to install this on a VPS somewhere. I'm not sure it actually works yet on a VPS, but there is an option where you can disable something. Anyway, if you're running this on your home network, you need to answer no to this question because you don't need it.
Okay.
Now it's setting up IPFS, so off we go. And it takes us through all the steps. Now, DigiNode Tools is a lot more than just installing this once. It also has a kind of update system so that you can actually, imagine DigiByte version 8 comes out. You can actually just run this again and it will automatically upgrade your system for you.
Oh, nice.
So that's kind of nice that if for the people who are running a device like this using DigiNode Tools, installing any updates should be pretty simple because it's just a question of going through the menu again. And we need to be a little bit patient here because we need to it has to set up a load of packages and things. The first time you do this, it does take a bit of time, but you don't need to sit around.
So once you've started the process, it just kind of knows what to do, and it just goes through each one and step by step. And once it's done with one process, it moves on to the next automatically, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the other thing that I've included in this, which I'll show you in a minute, but I'll talk about now while we're waiting, is called the DigiNode Status Monitor. So because you don't have a display connected to the machine, it's kind of hard to know that the node is all working properly. Mm-hmm. So when we're done, I'll show you. You can type DigiNode into the command line, and it brings up a little kind of head-up display which shows you the number of other nodes you're connected to. It checks that your ports are open. It shows you the IP address of the machine, your block counts, and all of the sort of information that you might want to know to ensure that it's working correctly.
So it's like a snapshot diagnostic
it's a quick way to just check that all systems are operational. And because you can do it through the terminal, then even if DigiAssets itself actually has a web interface for it, so you can actually go to diginode.local in your browser and actually use it to create your own DigiAssets and things like that from your own node. So that's a nice feature. But of course, if DigiAssets is not working, then you don't have any way of actually knowing that anything is working. So the terminal sort of status monitor will let you check that. So this requires patience, but we are getting there. I'm never quite sure why this part takes a long time. We'd have to ask Matthew that because he built it, but it has to get various packages and set things up.
Yeah. And when did you start working on this DigiNode tool?
So I started, I think in about August 2021, I kind of did my first forays, into learning how to do Bash. I'd never written any kind of script like this before, so I kind of have had to teach myself how to do this as I went along. And it's actually been fun and very rewarding. And it's way more advanced and way more feature complete than I ever imagined it would be. So I really hope that people find it useful. And hopefully it should make it easy that if you've got an old computer sitting around doing nothing, of course, the one great thing about running an operating system on an old computer where you don't have a desktop is that all of those resources that the desktop would use are freed up for the node. So if you've got a low power machine, that as long as it has 8 GB of RAM and enough disk space, you should be able to run it, even if the machine is, let's say, 10 years old, because the processing power, yes, it might be a bit slower, but you're not in a hurry typically, so it doesn't matter. So it's a great way to kind of if you've got an old computer sitting in a drawer, or you can also go on eBay and usually if you can find an old mini computer for maybe $100 and that you could set up a node on. So there are inexpensive options out there. Okay, and it seems we have pretty much finished.
Nice.
Now, one of the things it asks you to do is you can change the host name of the machine to DigiNode. The reason it's asking this is because I've actually got it set to DigiNode-Testnet. And the reason you might want to change it, as it explains, is so that you can then, into your browser, just type that diginode.local instead of having to remember the address of the machine on your network. So, but I'm actually going to say no to that because I don't need to change that at the moment. Hold on, say no. Right, so now it's now finished the installation. Now it does generally suggest that we reboot. I'm actually just wondering if I think I'm gonna reboot just to be on the safe side. So I've even as much as possible tell you the commands that you need to type in when you need to type them in. So you don't need to know that the command to restart a machine on Linux is sudo reboot, because it'll tell you that that's what you do. So okay. I'm going to type reboot. So the machine, I think that's just because it installs a lot of packages, and it's probably a good idea the first time you get it up and running to just restart the machine. Because one thing this script does is it sets it up so that when the machine powers on, it starts up the DigiByte node and the DigiAsset node automatically. So the nice thing about that is that, particularly if you're running on a Raspberry Pi where it doesn't actually have a power switch, it's generally, if it's plugged in, it's on. If you have a power outage or something like that, the machine will automatically power itself up again when the power comes back on. So you don't need to do anything to make sure that everything keeps running. Right, let's see if I can reconnect. So I need to move this slightly because it's off the bottom of the screen. Wait a minute. All right, so I'm now going to reconnect to my machine again. So I put SSH DigiByte at 192 and put that in. Put in my password. Right, so I'm now back in the machine again. And now if I type in DigiNode, it loads up the status monitor.
Nice.
And it does some checks first. And it'll get there in a second. There we go. So this gives you a kind of dashboard of everything that's going on the device. So very easy. Sign in, type DigiNode, and you'll get this screen. Now, you can even see that the number of connections are slowly climbing on this device. Now, I'm not sure I've actually opened the ports on this one, so it's going to struggle to connect to other nodes. But you can see it's already started syncing, and the synced count is actually counting up there. And And then it gives you, various things, shows you how long it's been online. It shows you the web address so you can go and mint your own Digi assets, shows you the status of all of the Digi asset node, and then various things about how much memory and disk space it's using. I've also included the ability to actually test that your ports are working. It's not 100% reliable at the moment, but it works most of the time. It should be able to it actually goes out to the internet and then tells a service to query back to your machine and say, can I find it to see that port 12024 is open, or the one for Digi access. So that is, that's kind of, so the nice thing about this is at any point you can sign in and type DigiNode and you'll be able to just see that everything is working, as it should be. Now I'm just going to go out of, that and press Q to quit. Whoops, there we go. Now, the other thing you can do is once you've installed DigiNode tools on your machine, at any point, you just type DigiNode setup. And this takes us back. This is basically the same as that command on the left that we typed in before, only from now on, it actually runs locally on the computer. The first time you run it, it's actually running from the GitHub servers.
Okay.
But once you've installed the node, that you can then go to this menu and it will give you, there's a few other features that I've got here. So you can log in and you can check for updates. There's a backup and restore feature. Now, this doesn't back up and restore the blockchain data itself, but what it does back up is your wallet file. So if you're actually using the wallet on your node, you can run backup and it will prompt you for a USB stick, and you plug the USB stick back into the back of the device that you're running this on, like be it an old computer or the Raspberry Pi, and it will then copy your DigiByte wallet and some of the settings related to Digi assets onto the stick. You can then stick that wallet, that USB stick in a safe somewhere or somewhere secure, and know that if your device dies, you can always recover the funds on the node. And similarly, restore will ask for the stick and you can plug it in and it will copy everything back. So that, for example, I mean, maybe you suddenly decide that this machine is too old and you want to get a new, more powerful node. You can back it up onto a stick, run the script on a new machine, and then restore it back on, and it will put your wallet and everything back onto the new machine. The other options here, you can enable or disable UPnP that we talked about before. There's a couple of extra features here where if you're running it on, there's an Argon case that you can buy for the Raspberry Pi that has a fan and extra features, and there's an option here which will help you to install those. I am currently in the process of adding a feature which will ask you whether you want to set up a mainnet node or a testnet node at the point that you're setting it up, and it will also from this menu let you switch between them. So if it's on mainnet, you can say switch it and start running on testnet. So that hopefully in the future you can run this script on two devices. On one you set up mainnet, on the other you set up testnet. And I think that pretty much covers everything it can do. The only other thing I would probably mention is if I go back to the dashboard or the status monitor, one of the things that if you open up the status monitor, one of the things it actually does is check if there are any updates to all of the software that's running on your machine. So if, let's say, there is an update to Digi Assets or to DigiByte Core, it will actually suddenly tell you on the right here. And when you quit the software, it will actually take you through the process of installing that update. So it makes the process of managing the node very simple, because you never really have to do much on the command line. You just simply run DigiNode, the status monitor, or run DigiNode-setup, and those are really the two commands you need to know in order to do everything to do with your DigiByte node and DigiAsset node on the device. And as you can see, it is gradually, you can see the block count is gradually climbing. I mean, what's happened here is, of course, there's no blockchain on this machine, so it is slowly going through the blocks from the very, very beginning up to the present. And you can see it's at 0.39%. So I think in my experience on a Raspberry Pi for 8 GB, it probably takes about 8 hours, I think, to sync, to get up to date. But and then it will just show 100%. But yeah, that is DigiNode Tools. That's pretty much everything you need to know about it. So if you've got an old computer and you'd like to set up a node on it and don't want to have a screen and everything else attached, then maybe this will be useful.
Yeah, I think that it absolutely would be useful. I mean, that looks like a very, very neat, very convenient tool to have in case you want to set up a node, especially for DigiAsset, because yeah, like I say, you just kind of do a couple of commands and then it does everything else automatically on its own. So I think that would be absolutely a very useful tool for everyone to use. So thank you for taking the time to build that. I mean, that seems like obviously a lot of work went into putting that all together, and a lot of thought too. You really kind of went through each step. Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, you've been working on it since last year, and yeah, it looks like it has it's a feature-rich application, and I'm sure a lot of people can find a lot of uses for that. And I absolutely. Is it okay if we put a link down below for
yeah, absolutely.
For this on GitHub too? Okay.
So the GitHub address is my last kind of thing I need to do for this project is my plan is to get a website online to help promote it. It will be at digibyte.help. Unfortunately, I'm not really a web designer, so this has taken me a while to get done. Yeah. And I'm planning to do some video tutorials to explain each step of the process. So even if you're not particularly technical and you don't know how to do it, you should be able to follow along and get set up. I think one thing I'm going to try and do, hopefully by the time this show airs, is actually have a written tutorial at least ready to go to explain sort of the steps of actually setting up the operating system on an old machine and typing in the commands and basically doing the steps that I've just done. And I will write that up and I will put it up on the DigiNode Tools GitHub page, or there'll be a link to it somewhere. So that at least until the video tutorials are up, you should be able to follow along with those. And if you get stuck, there is also a, where is it? Somewhere, I think I went past it. The support, yeah. So there is a DigiNode Tools Telegram group. Oh, sorry, you're not.
Oh, yeah, pull it back up. Okay.
So there is a DigiNode Tools Telegram group that you can click on from the GitHub page. So if you have questions or you need help or you want advice on what computer or whether your computer will be able to run it, just come and ask there, and I will do my best to answer your questions.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been great, Ollie. I mean, I really love seeing stuff like this and people coming in and just on their own initiative, just going in and building something that is extremely useful for the community. So thank you so much also for coming in and talking to us about everything else, about the nodes and all the node crawlers and the ports and all this technical stuff. Like I said, I'm just not a very technical person, and it's something that, as community members, we got to take it upon ourselves to get this information out there for not just ourselves, but for others as well. That way we can build a bigger network of nodes and the open nodes, the full nodes that can really strengthen the blockchain and, make DigiByte as great as it can be and reach its full potential. So I mean, it's my hope with this that hopefully, whatever your technical level, if you follow the instructions and you have, you should be able to get up and running. And Mike, if I can get you running a node, I feel I've succeeded at my task. If you can get me to run a node, you can get anyone to run a node. That absolutely. So, Ollie, thank you so much for everything. We'll be in touch. Hopefully, you'll be willing to come back some time in the future, and we can go through some more of this stuff and get this information out there for the community. And best of luck with the DigiNode. Have yourself a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. All right,
okay,
bye.
Thank you.